We are live, sir.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to vSchool AIM's webinar with Dr. Padma Bhushan, Dr. Jagdish Seth. Dr. Seth is a global veteran in the space of marketing and consumer behavior, and also a recipient of the 3 honors from American Association of Marketing. I bring greetings to all of you from our group director and all the family of vSchool Bangalore, Mumbai, and Delhi. First of all, I profusely thank Dr. Jagdish Seth for his gracious presence on this webinar. And vSchool is very honored to associate with work with you, sir, in various initiatives, be it doctoral consortium, marketing research conference, and other reputed initiatives wherein you bring to your expertise along with global academic fraternity, engulfing a true spirit of internationalization amongst B schools globally. Before I request Dr. Jagdish Seth for his valuable insights on today's topic, India in the post-COVID global economy, let me run through the flow of today's webinar. After my welcome, I would request my colleagues, Professor Vijayan, to set the context and Dr. D.N. Murthy to introduce his favorite mentor, Dr. Jagdish Seth, though Dr. Jagdish Seth needs no formal introduction. Then we have the illustrious Padma Bhushan recipient speak for 20-25 minutes. My team at the back end shall collate all questions from the Q&A panel. I request all the participants to pose your questions on the Q&A panel. And our professors shall question and pose questions of the one which you are going to pose to us, to Dr. Jagdish Seth. Finally, I shall conclude at 9:05 p.m. with formal word of thanks. Now, may I request Professor Vijayan to take over from here. Professor Vijayan.
Thank you, Dr. Anand Rao. Dear Dr. Jagdish Seth, it's absolutely a privilege to be part of this priceless moment, which comes only once in a person's lifetime. Sir, today's audience would be looking forward to unravel some of the complex sub-themes of the topic. The audience would be interested in understanding how there would be the new pushes and pulls between different stakeholders, which would in turn influence many business models which are largely around capitalism. Sir, it would be a great interest and a learning for us to also get your views on what is the right leadership moments and responses members of the board, members of the management community, and the head HR professionals in order to, to have a calming effect of the disaster and to prepare the world, to prepare India for the future. Once again, sir, I thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy to hand over to my colleague, Professor Dr. Murthy, to do a formal introduction of Dr. Jagdish Seth. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vijayan. Professor Jagdish Seth, very, I am a great fan of him, and it is my privilege of introducing him, the legend in the area of consumer behavior and consumer psychology, to the audience today. Padma Bhushana Professor Jagdish N. Seth is a professor of marketing at Guyzeta Business School of Emory University, and he was one of the core team members during the initial years of Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, the very first business school in India. And he is currently a fellow of Association of Consumer Research. And Dr. Seth was awarded Padma Bhushana very recently, and in the area of literature and education. And the moment we heard that news, probably the whole India academics and especially the fraternity of management education really celebrated like his own family members, and we were so glad. And congratulations for achieving the highest award for any Indian who's living outside India, and congratulations for that. One of the major contributions of Professor Jagdish Seth as a marketing professor, and right from my student days, was his theory of buyer behavior, which he developed along with his mentor, Professor John Howard. And Probably I'm not exaggerating it, but probably there is no marketing academic or a marketing student who has graduated his marketing course without studying the Howard-shaped model of consumer behavior. It has become almost like a Bible to understand the consumer buying process. And so thank you very much for providing us such a wonderful academic piece. Sheth has so far published more than 200 articles and named the journals in the world his articles have appeared there. And he has written some of the great books, and some of them are The Accidental Scholar, which he very recently released, Chindia Rising, Tectonic Shift, the Geo-Economic Realignment of Globalizing Markets, The Rule of Three, Surviving and Thriving in Competitive Markets. He has written a handbook of relationship marketing and also a book on the self-destructive habits of good companies. And one more important thing which I should mention, because when I was in US and I was doing my postdoc at fastest business school at University of Washington, Seattle, there was one big research event, and I saw that everyone was excited to conduct that doctoral consortium. And when I learned from my mentor, Dr. Douglas McMahon, popularly known as Mac, he said Professor Jack Sheth is the one who's funding the whole research, and the way they were excited to talk about Professor Jack Sheth during that whole event at Fast Business School. I was really proud to be an Indian, and towards another Indian like Jack Sheth, who is contributing through his Sheth Family Foundation for promoting research all across the globe. So thank you very much. And now I request Professor Jagdish Sheth to take over and proceed with his talk.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. It's such a nice introduction. Good to be back with you virtually now. Or more and more, artificially is going to become real as we are finding it right now. I also want to thank Uday Shalunke, the group director for the We Schools in general. We have been good friends for many, many years. And in his younger days, I have been involved in School of Design, especially, and with the We School in Bombay. And of course, I had the pleasure of really getting close friendship with Anand Rao. He's a great leader also. And Professor Vijay, who will be raising the questions. So I'm basically back in Bangalore, literally. I used to come to Bangalore more often because I was on the board of Wipro 4 or 5 times a year to attend the board meetings, and then I'll meet others. But now I'm slowing down and will probably come to India once or twice a year. But I think this medium has become more. Actually, one thing good about internet is that it has an enormous reach. I can reach anybody and anybody can reach me. So reach is very key. And surprisingly, it's a very rich medium. So we'll talk about the impact of technology in the geopolitical dynamics of the world a little later on. Let me set the stage. Until the Cold War ended in 1989, most of the tensions in the world were around ideology. Capitalism versus communism. The World War II essentially was German expansion, the Reich movement. It was ideologically based if you analyze it properly, and that has changed. Going forward, and especially post-COVID, the world will be more and more driven by economics. And therefore, all the diplomats have to learn not the Cold War language, but really have to understand business 101. I mean, what is a brand? Is India a brand, and how do I promote the brand? It's typical marketing things. Have to become more trade ambassadors, or surprisingly, brand ambassadors. Whether you are a consul general or a staff person in the embassy, you are an ambassador to a country, and that is very important going forward. All nations are doing the same thing. The prime ministers and the presidents, the heads of the states, are now becoming more and more economics oriented, less and less ideology driven. Although we do have exceptions, but that's the move. All of this came to a change with the collapse of communism in 1989. I think that was a major event in life, pretty much. There was a world order before that, and the world order now is changing, and I will articulate the role of India in the process pretty much. Surprisingly, India is becoming much more strategic now than ever before, even 20, 25 years ago, even after the Indian, the second independence, as we call it, which is 1991 reforms, an economy grew very fast, just like China, but India is becoming very strategic going forward. So let's start with my presentation. I just gave the introduction. And Dr. Rao, if you can put the first slide up, please. So the title of the presentation is India and the Post-COVID Global Economy. Slide number 2, please. Second slide. This was the old world order. As of 1987, as you can see, 75% of all value add GDP was only in 15 countries. The rest of the world didn't matter. That was US and Canada, North America, 12 common market countries, and Japan, which is a late entrant after World War II, essentially. 45% of all world trade was only among these nations. In other words, they bought and sold goods from each other, mostly because they all had subsidiaries in each other territories, and there was a lot of internal transfer mechanism. The old trade theory has broken down because there is today more intra-company trade than between nation trades. So trade is very artificial number now, which we are watching how that will impact with the change in post-COVID economy. The rest 55% of the trade all these 15 nations did was to buy raw materials, whether those are agricultural raw materials like commodities or whether those industrial raw materials. They all came, they had to buy that to do value add, which is why it is not as high as the GDP contribution. Unfortunately, all of them are aging and aging very rapidly. Japan has a point of no return. Every month there are fewer men than the last month, and there is nothing they can do because they did not invite immigration to revitalize the population. Germany, which is a very large economy, anchored to the European Union economy in many ways. Germany today has a zero population growth because number of deaths is the same as the number of births, I guess. And in the process, they are trying to invite immigrants through refugee programs, and it has become politically very controversial. In the US, we still have a positive population growth, 1.6 children per woman, but it is below the replacement rate. And eventually it's a matter of time before we will become like Germany or like Japan. This was the world order. It came into place because America defeated Japan in World War II. America also defeated Germany in World War II. There was a huge destruction of capital. Everything was destroyed, factories, homes, etc. There was a rebuilding of the whole world economy, which created an enormous growth from 1950-51 all the way till the 1989, essentially. And Cold War became a common battleground. So America invested in Japan, for example, invested in Europe, what is called the Marshall Plan, and they imposed their own value system and organized three major institutions: International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and of course the last one was United Nations. That created an order in place. Your politics, your military side, and your economic side were harmonious among these 15 nations, which is why you see the plus sign. Let's go to the next chart. There is no new world order. I call it world disorder. It has begun after the collapse of communism, primarily with the rise of China as a major superpower. There is no denial by anybody that China is going to become probably the dominant economy in the world, surpassing the United States. And I think that is creating an enormous tension in the Western world because basically the economy is moving away from America. It is no longer the American century. Before that one was the European century. It is now the Asian century, led by primarily, in fact, China. I think that's very important for us to understand. I also believe, in fact, that a number of other factors are happening. The discord that has taken place among traditional allies and alliances is breaking up. That discord is very important to understand because we had a nice NATO alliance on the one hand, and the Europeans were all together with us on the other hand, pretty much America, Europe alignment. With the new elections taking place, new leadership coming in, that is breaking up. In fact, NATO is having a tension of its own. And today, French have one opinion, Germans have a different opinion. And of course, you saw the ultimate prize. Brexit took place where United Kingdom decided not to be with their neighbors, English Channel, but go across the whole ocean, we call it the pond, and align with America. It's a matter of time before UK economy will be tightly aligned with the American economy, and maybe Canadian and American together. Populism everywhere. This has been a surprise to everybody, whoever does the geopolitical work. There is a movement worldwide that we are just fed up with the existing governments, no matter who leads it. And small parties, unknown parties come into power and take over the nation. All of Europe, you have seen this trend. Latin America, you have seen this trend. It is happening all over the world. So populism has become a major issue in changing the policy and the popularity of parties. Incumbent parties are at a loss pretty much all over the world. There is an Asia-centric economic and military pivot that I mentioned, but military pivot is very important to understand. As China expands in the South China Sea, its military power to protect its own interests, as it puts the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a major infrastructure investment, pretty much all over through Russia, through Central Asia, through actually marine routes, and leading into Africa and Europe, the old Silk Route, as it is called, becoming the new Silk Road, but it is more powerful, more physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. This is making the world nervous about the rise of China. Its intentions are good, or intentions are much more militaristic, like the rise of Japan before World War II. We do have the rise of new brand-conscious middle class all over the world. In China, people do not make things at home anymore, nor do they buy homemade products or unbranded consumption. It is all becoming more and more branded consumption. In India, the movement has already begun. For example, even today, we may have 60% unbranded products, but now more and more branded product, and not buying through unorganized sector, but buying through organized sector is happening. So we brand atta today, rice also, wheat, anything that's raw material, we want it packaged and properly labeled, etc., etc. And this is going to create consumer market growth much more so in China and India, which changes the paradigm about the economic aspects of the world. There is a strong political and social acrimony globally. I wish we had not invented Twitter. Twitter is creating an enormous discord among people. Rather than sending messages around, people are using Twitter to have battles of the word, essentially, as we have the battles, real battles. And the last point is very key. Capital markets are just don't know what they want to do. Uncertainty has risen, especially with the COVID phenomenon and the lockdown procedures in most countries of the world, or shelter in place, as they call it for us. I think this is very important to understand. That social media is amplifying so much, and the markets are becoming more and more uncertain about the future. Therefore, they don't know where to invest. And I will just make one point around here that the traditional public equity market, the stock markets, or the traditional debt market will be replaced by more and more private capital. After the first energy crisis in the 74, 78, private capital took over. Private equity, we used to call it in those days. So you had the Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett company buying out very cheap assets because stock market collapsed. And when stock market collapses, debt to equity ratio rises. You are not able to fulfill your debt, for example, and that you can see that happening in retailing right now in America. JCPenney just declared Chapter 11 protection. At the same time, in fact, two major other brand names, Neiman Marcus at a premium level, super premium almost, also declared bankruptcy. Sears is gone. All of these, the stock market came down as we are shifting from the industrial companies or retailing driving the S&P 500 or Dow Jones, and there are comparable Indian indices. It is much more, if you look at the Dow Jones 30 or S&P 500, out of the top 10 companies, 7 are all technology companies now, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So that's the change. Future will be capital, private capital markets. That includes sovereign funds, for example, which is a very large set of assets. Large companies like BlackRock and Blackstone, $7 trillion of assets given for management. And they are not just private equity traditionally, but they're all forms of capital. You can have a venture capital. You can have a mezzanine capital. They're one-stop shop for everything, in addition to sovereign funds. Like a Norwegian sovereign fund for such a small country is so large. And sovereign funds will be also playing their game economically in where to invest, which companies to stop, which companies to invest more, etc. So those debates will happen in Q&A. We can pick up a little more. Next area, please. Next slide. This is the new world order. The old triad power of Japan in Asia is replaced by China. The old North America still stays there, but the Europe is taking a second seat now. So the new triad power is US, India, and China. But you can see the signs are not all positive. There is no question today, what used to be a question mark relationship between China and America has now become full-blown negative relationship. They are even using the COVID phenomenon, the pandemic that began, who to blame. And the blame game has already begun, intentionally ratcheting up the political rhetoric between the two nations. And you have a tit for tat in words, but it will spill into trade, it will spill into economic aspects, and maybe ultimately some sort of a military confrontation of some sort. We are all worrying about that quite a lot. You see the positive relationship between India and the United States. That was not the case during the non-alignment movement. Right after the formation of the nations, India had a choice to align with the Western allies. If we had aligned with them, we would be the manufacturing capital of the world, because all the foreign companies from America and Europe would have come there to invest, because they had no labor at that time availability, and they would have given the technology, etc. We missed that boat. The non-alignment movement was set back again further by when we had to align to secure our borders, which was Mrs. Gandhi's time period, we aligned with the Soviet Union, which did not give the economic aspects very well, although militarily protected. So now there's a third alignment taking place where India and the US see each other as strategically very important to each other. And surprisingly, the balance of power, as I see it, is that America needs India more than India may need America today. To balance the power with China, India becomes a very strong strategic partner for the American perspective and their view. I think that we need to watch that. Why is this new triad power arising? Very simple. Most of the economies of the world are driven by consumer demand, not industrial or government or military demand. And consumer demand, these are the three largest nations. China is usually number one, followed by India number two, not limited to cell phones, please. Not limited to technology sector, but this is true in automotive, for example. This is true in appliances, for example. This will be true in foods, that no matter what you look at it, because the sheer population all wanting to buy branded consumption products, which means just Western world in many ways. And the United States is a third because of its population size, but also its buying power. And we have changed the measures through purchasing power parity, which means these nations look much better, India and China, because of sheer size and comparability of pricing on exchange changes. But the foreign exchange calculations are not the same as the purchasing power parity. So consumer markets. Second thing is infrastructure. China built itself on infrastructure, as did America in the early days, about 100 years ago. I think infrastructure is a very big opportunity and a necessity in India. I'm talking about public infrastructure, not just the roads and the railways, modernizing the railway, but also building seaports. We have very limited seaports for a country with such a large coastal line and hundreds of airports. Not dozens, I'm talking about hundreds of airports, all in second-tier cities, because that's where often factories are. And how do you ship out the product? Air freight will be as important as passenger flying. And of course, India was growing very well till the COVID lockdown, about 15% growth in the domestic travel. People are shifting from railway traveling to more and more airline, as we have sort of a cheaper airlines, no-frills airlines, and demand was escalating. So that's the second area, infrastructure. The third one, India is a major defense buyer in the world. And more, India will insist that you have to make it in India rather than ship it out from your country. And I think that's already happening, which is a military alignment between, or strategic alliance as it is called, between the United States and India. And the last one is the security. Homeland security, cyber security are going to be common battlegrounds or platforms. This makes India in a very interesting situation, in a dilemma. What should be the relationship between India and China? China is another superpower, just like India is. It's the Soviet Union and allies, as it was called during Cold War. And we decided as an Indian government to have a non-alignment movement. Is that appropriate, or should we do something differently? I have an institute I created some time ago now. I see the trilateral relationship much more significant and strategic for the world than bilateral relationship. So we wanted to create a policy think tank and institute. An obvious name would be China, India, America. But then it's like a CIA institute, which is not the acronym we wanted. I did not want America in the front, so we changed the name to India, China, America Institute. Very fascinating sort of think tank, thinking about the future from a geopolitical angle viewpoint. Let's go to the next slide, please. Why India is destined to become strategic globally. Both China and the US consider India to be strategic for their future, which is why India has all the right ingredients to become dominant global player, but it needs a recipe for global positioning. Next slide, please. Here are the India's enviable ingredients. As I talked about, the large business consumer market growing faster than the world economy in that regard. We are converting from unorganized, unbranded to organized, branded consumption primarily. Defense and infrastructure investment opportunities, everybody's watching that. We have a large pool of digital talent. We have produced more software engineers, engineering students because of the early policy of investing in engineering and, of course, in medicine. So we have a large pool of doctors also all over the world, surprisingly, and they're doing very well. If you watch the American television on everything about the pandemic today, some of the best brain and the scientists are all of Indian origin, most of them managing, let's say, public health in some fashion, epidemiology, and the kind of clinical trials they're doing. I'm so pleased and proud how strong the Indian diaspora has done all over the world, whether it's in England, America, Canada, and the rest of the world, which is another point. One of the key ingredients India has to leverage is its global diaspora. Highly respected, highly admired across disciplines. In the academic world, you have seen that thing very clearly, not only in the business schools, but at the university level. You have seen in the scientific community. You see now in the policy area quite a lot. In fact, very heavily involved into the governance, whether it's on the legislative side or on the White House, the executive side. Very, very young people are now rising very high in the American ecosystem, and therefore the diaspora is very important to leverage as a great ingredient. India's soft power is growing. I know in my early days when I used to travel, I had a hard time traveling with Indian passport all over Europe. In fact, they think I'm there to settle down immediately. India had an image of country of roaming cows and snake charmers. When I came back to America, they would always ask me a question, are you a diamond merchant? I don't know why. Maybe I look like Gujarati diamond merchant. And I had to say, no, I'm a professor, and there's a disbelief. Professors cannot be from India. Today, when I travel to Europe before the lockdown, people smile at me. Person who is carrying my bags to my hotel room says, are you a software engineer? Isn't that change? Total change from a very traditional poverty-driven society, which is the old image of India, to becoming now sort of the more contemporary and modern and a future India. I think that's a very strong soft power arising of India worldwide. We also have a very strong military. Do not underestimate the size and the power of Indian military. It is comparable to some of the larger military powers in the world. I think we have last area, which is very, very key. And I put it at the end just to emphasize, compared to the license Raj days, we all had a view that I cannot do anything. I cannot make choices. I cannot be an entrepreneur. The ecosystem is not friendly. Yeah, I can inherit the family business, but there are enough family members to take care. I can go abroad, and hopefully I make my future brighter when I go abroad. So we had a huge exit of the talent and the brain power, as it is called. Today, it's just the opposite almost. Still, people will go out, but there is a sense that I can do it. I think that self-image is a very important point. We are all now becoming very proud of our heritage, where we came. Education system, no matter how much we complain in India, I'm talking about higher education, gave us higher education at no price whatsoever, almost free. I remember my 5 years, I had to pay nothing. And I got very good education, which was a foundation for me to excel no matter where I go. And every person of Indian origin living abroad will tell you, in the field of education, in the field of science, country invested in them. Where the self-image, self-confidence is a very key factor about the rise of India in a global economy. Next chart. So this is the key change for India's repositioning. From a restricted domestic economy, we still have the license Raj legacy, although 1991 reforms have changed choices, at least if nothing else, but policy, procedures, bureaucracy is still very much the same. How do you become an integrated global economy? That's one dimension the shift has to take place. And the other one, more important or equally important, is that country has to become from a low-tech, highly labor-intensive to a high-tech economy. And this is going to create some debates, although I think it's beyond the debate now. Every nation that has risen has embraced newer technologies, whether it was Japan, then Korea, now China, for example, or any place else in the world. So it's almost a mandate rather than a wish list. So one has to have a repositioning of India about future repositioning as a very high-tech nation with integration with the global economy, both through trade as well as through investment. So how do we become globally integrated? Next slide. No. We have to go back 2 slides. Yes, correct. This is the slide. Right after this, please. Next slide, please. Yes. First one is become the global hub for technical talent. The numbers are just staggering. And my recommendation is to do more at the R&D level, where new inventions and discoveries take place. Make our laws so uniform that what is invented in India by foreign companies as well as Indian companies is compatible or comparable to world patent rights, intellectual property rights, which we are doing it. And the world is coming actually to more and more do technology work, not just IT services, which has done quite well. About $150 billion industry in the last 25 years we have created, and we have done very, very well actually, whether it's a TCS, Wipro, Infosys, whatever the companies are. So Indian software industry has risen to the occasion through government incentives, having SEZ zones, whatever we have done, and accounting and legal. Hyderabad is rising as the major global hub. Today, all top Silicon Valley companies have their back offices in India. It's not outsourcing to Indian companies, it is their own, what we call captive centers. So you do your own research in India, as publishing industry is all done in India more and more, in fact, almost a dominant position, whether whatever journals people have, whatever book you have, most of the back office work is done in India by the companies people themselves, not outsourcing to a third party. So I think that's key point is become the global hub for technical talent. Second one, become a second global sourcing destination. Right now, every country in the world, every company would like to at least minimize dependence on China. For mundane products, not just for pharmaceuticals and some key ingredients, but China today makes 94% of the world microwave ovens. And today people can't live without a microwave oven, as people cannot live without a refrigerator anymore. What if China decides, I want to shut down microwave ovens? You will have street riots. As people are cooped up now, any kind of a daily necessity you cannot get access, people will have street protest. It is that important to de-risk from China and allow other countries to also be your supply chain. And India is one of the major opportunities if we know how to tackle and get it done, as Vietnam has done it, surprisingly. Thailand, of course, has done some time ago. Many years ago in the 90s, Malaysia, the Japanese were outsourcing Sony brand manufactured in Malaysia. Bangladesh has done a great job in terms of garment industry. And my view that Bangladesh can do it, we can do it any day. It's just the willpower and the policy change that we have to make, and the companies have to support that in many ways. Point number 3, embrace global standards and global benchmarks for domestic products. There is no some such thing as my domestic low quality product and my export high quality product. Today, all quality, high quality products has to be done, because domestic size is so large that if you can actually make high quality products in India itself for Indian consumers or Indian customers in industrial markets, by definition, it becomes globally accessible, globally acceptable product. So it's happening in auto components. India is the largest auto component maker for small cars, not only because of the Maruti and Suzuki, but Toyota buys their components there for the world markets. We have seen the same thing happening in pharmaceutical through generics, if nothing else. And of course, we have very large growth of processed foods. Companies like Haldiram's are making what is made a street vendor food into a large packaged branded things. If Haldiram can do it, large companies can do it for export market at the same time. Gain soft power through globally admired brands. One thing missing is that people don't talk about, they talk about the individuals, the people side, the human capital, but people don't talk about how I'm admiring one Indian brand. Brand could be domestic, but going global, for example, except in the IT services. Japan had the same problem. Make in Japan was a laughing stock in the 50s when I was growing up, for example. Nobody would like to buy made in Japan products. But Japanese government and the industry took a stand that they will have world standards, followed by Korea, and now it is China. China can make products of all quality, not just low quality. Luxury brands are made in China by foreign companies. So they acquire the technology, the skill set, whatever they did, however they did it. But we can learn quite a lot on how other nations over time have become high quality, good value brands, and those domestic brands then become global brands in many ways. I'm a very strong advocate that the new soft power comes for nations, not from just culture and ideology and religion, but it also comes from very much products that the nation offers. And that is why Japanese have become enviable. Germans always were enviable for their engineering talent. America became very famous for their products the same way 100 years ago. It's the same phenomenon. Next chart, please. Next one, yeah. Speed up digital infrastructure. The real future leverage for India would be not as much physical infrastructure, which is necessary, but will be enabled by or amplified by digital infrastructure, which we are very good. 4G is in place on a nation level. 5G is about to roll out or will be rolled out. It's a matter of time. We have the whole India stack movement taking place. Aadhaar platform is nobody in the world can create a platform of 1.3 billion people with absolutely complete biometric information. I think this cell phone revolution has made enormous change in the society in general, but also has become a major economic tool to do more things. And of course, rural reach. We are able to reach now. So if you look at Flipkart and Amazon data, they're selling very well their products in the second, third tier small towns, and not as much actually in the metro, because metro you have other alternatives and competition. In small towns, there is no other choice. This is like Walmart in America, who started with small towns, dominated those, and then it came to the metro area. Invite foreign investment in India for global markets. I think India has to become a manufacturing destination, services destination. It has already become. So companies like Microsoft, Capgemini, IBM, Accenture are all having major hubs for their global clients, and accounting the Ernst & Youngs of the world, whatever the other companies are, KPMG, etc., Deloitte. They're all doing work in India, not just for the American clients, but their world clients by and large. I think this is very important. India has to encourage foreign investment and make it easy to do. And I'll come to that in a Q&A a little later on. Provide economic incentives for innovation and entrepreneurship. We have to have something like the National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health. America invested in R&D, giving that to companies like IBM Labs, for example, at one time, Xerox Labs. They all got government funding also, in addition to the universities. I think we have to have something like NSF, which is quite well done in China. China has emulated America very well, and they fund quite a lot to create innovation, which is proprietary of Indian origin. And that involves creating investment innovation clusters as opposed to manufacturing clusters, and R&D invited to do in India. Next page, please. Point number 8. Digitize, digitize, digitize. As the new saying is, data is the new oil. Just like in the industrial age, oil was such a critical resource, which it still is for petrochemicals. Today, data is very critical, and India can manage the data. We seem to have a capability. The digital side, we are quite good, actually. So my encouragement is digitize everything and have large databases that can be very valuable. It also creates greater transparency and accountability. And finally, it enhances human capital. I'm of the belief that the more we automate, the more the human value goes up. The worst use of human value has been always in agriculture, in the feudal or the landlord system, where you are working 7 days a week, you have no life, no savings. You are basically a bonded labor or slaves in some countries at one time. When the industrialization took place and we shifted from agriculture to manufacture, work conditions became better. Unions were formed as watchguards for your interest, but also more importantly, the wages went up. Hourly wages in agriculture are the lowest. Now it's the industrial wages which are higher, but industrial age is giving way to more and more the knowledge economy, so the wages have to go up. So in the IT services, call centers may command, the customer is willing to pay for your employee maybe $10 to $15 per hour voice. BPO is a little better. IT services is much more. And my view is that we need to go where the hourly wage commanded by an Indian worker is $90 to $100 per hour. High end, high tech is more important, because in the low tech, you have the whole continent of Africa, you have the Southeast Asia countries, you have Latin America, and some of the European, Eastern European countries. They can compete very well on labor. Labor is not the one, but labor that is actually enriched by, enabled by technology is very important. That's the point I want to make. Next point is mandate management education for diplomats, military, and state enterprises. There's a whole another group of people who are in the policy and the public sector domains, pretty large in India. public sector economy by state enterprises still maybe about 40% of the total economy. Then you have the bureaucrats and the policymakers. They go through the IS exams or comparable one like foreign service exam or police exam. None of them have any understanding of business or management. And it cannot happen because their own academies have to teach what they teach. It has to be mandated. It's not new recruits, but the existing recruits, existing people, which are millions of those people who need to have new knowledge about the world economy, management side, branding, trade ambassadors, etc., which they don't have. And they have to run the governments in some fashion. So I strongly believe that we need to reposition the existing training colleges for the government sector. And the last point is that we really have to deepen our relationship with the G20 nations. In other words, how do we get much deeper through personal and professional relationship? And I must tell you that one of the things I've been watching is our Prime Minister as he meets Russian leader Putin or Angela Merkel in Germany or young person Trudeau in Canada or President Obama in the last election and now President Trump. Abe, on the other hand, I've never seen one single leader who is praised by everybody almost the same way. These are different personalities, and they have come from very different backgrounds. They have their own biases, stereotypes about India. All of a sudden, it gets level playing field, equalized, and this personal relationship that you create outside of formal meetings is very important. You become a trusted advisor, not on professional advice. That's expert for hire, but now you begin to share personal stories. And it seems like Prime Minister Modi, as I hear through grapevine from different countries, is doing fantastically well. It's very unusual for one human being to please such different personalities with different ideologies, different concerns, and at the same time manage the relationship properly. Let's go to the last slide, please. Last slide. So I will just conclude quickly. I know I've taken more time than probably was necessary. There is a new geopolitical order. The traditional leaders and institutions are struggling to maintain world order. The populism movement is so strong. This has generated opportunity for new leadership. Xi Jinping, Trump for us, and of course, Modi in India. India is destined to become strategic globally, as I mentioned before. Last page, please. Next page. India has enviable ingredients, but needs a recipe to take advantage of the new world order. Unlike first time through non-alignment movement, we missed the manufacturing opportunity. Under Mrs. Gandhi aligning with Soviet Union for whatever reason, we missed the economic development till we got into a crisis mode in 1991 and we had to liberalize the economy. That gave the spark. Repositioning India from a restricted domestic economy to a globally integrated economy and from a low-tech nation to a high-tech nation. Second dimension is more important than even the first dimension. The 10-point recommendations will ensure India's strategic place in the new world order. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. I'm sorry it took a little longer than I thought, but hopefully we'll have questions and answers that we can follow up. And so thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Sheth. That was really, you've covered a lot of ground. It was quite fascinating. I want to pose a question which Mr. Nandish Hiremath wants your opinion. He believes that in the 1991 liberalization driven economy change, it was around liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The question he wants to know is, what would be India's competitive levers in the current and the post-COVID situation? Because in India, sir, there's a lot of heaviness about COVID. So it would be great if you could respond to this request. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. The first one has to do, because of the COVID, there's a very strong belief that making things should be distributed. You still may have a global architecture, but with local production, which means the traditional export markets will slow down, same company, but they will start distributing manufacturing locally. So that's one way where India can gain enormously by saying that X% of things that are made in China, we can do as well. In the services, we do that anyhow. We have a huge surplus in services with America, for example, but not manufactured products. So one can look at that. It's very doable, and I'll tell you why. And I'll come to the other point. The main thing I've found is that today, 60% of all the world diamonds are cut only in India. There is no distant second even. How come we dominate diamond business, which is globally very competitive? We have the resources, the talent. If you want to find the diamonds, where do you go? You go to where the diamond mines are. Or if you want to find gold, where do you go? Where there are gold mines, for example, which is the talent that we have and a skill set around here. Now, if that's the case, America is the largest diamond consumer in the world, by the way. We buy more diamonds, we consume more diamonds than anybody else in the world. Except that today, the largest seller, retailer of diamonds is Walmart, not jewelry stores. The channel has shifted. Walmart can pump more diamonds, if we are smart, made in India, because they have a vested interest to align with India, as America aligns with India, for example. And they will sell Indian-made diamonds through Walmart system in China. Not only Canada, not only Mexico, where they're dominant anyhow through the NAFTA, but in China. I think we have to think like that. So that's clearly one aspect. The second aspect is that we will have more and more liberalization, because right after the COVID phenomenon subsides, there'll be a huge pent-up demand, just like World War II, where for 4 years, economy was shut down, except it continued, consumer economy, but it continued with military production. So factories were running. So now we have to have a factory running, supply chain back in place, and the world demand will happen. But I think it'll be more focused on domestic demand, not as much on export. Every country will say, what can I do to serve my domestic market immediately? Whether it's a food security. We are worrying in America right now about food security. We are forcing the chicken factories, pork factories to open up, despite the pandemic going on. Because people are rebelling if they don't get the chicken or protein through the animal side. And Americans are still not ready to get protein on the plant-based protein, as we do in India quite a lot, the vegetarian side. They're still not used to that, or supply chain is not organized properly. So I think those are the things that India can do very well. Sorry to give a long answer.
Thank you, sir.
We have a question from one Chandra from Dubai. How you see this situation will impact the GCC economies? GCC in general, UAE in particular, has a lot of interdependence on the subcontinent economies.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Chandra, for raising that question. I know Chandra myself personally. We are very close friends also. I think GCC relationship will morph into three things. First of all, GCC has an enormous amount of sovereign funds. If you include Saudi Arabia, UAE, those sovereign funds, the capital will come into Indian market, especially in public infrastructure like ports and the airports, for example, building. But infrastructure is always a private-public partnership. And cities like Dubai or countries like UAE know how to build world-class infrastructure. We build quite a lot there. So there's a synergy of talents. So clearly, that's one thing I see. The capital will come through the Dubai gateway and other gateways into India, clearly one, which has always been a flow, but it will intensify. Second one is that Indian products will be sold through GCC countries in also Iran, which is going on right now. I think we just have not aspired to say, how can we push our consumer products, I'm talking about, made in India, let's say Hindustan Unilever, as opposed to Unilever parent company. Let's say ITC, which makes enormous great products. Marico makes good products. Wipro Consumer Care has great products. Is there a mandate, a requirement that management has to push themselves to sell more in GCC countries rather than just rely on the domestic demand, which is pretty good. I think it's another thing. We did that with Russia alignment. Lots of our consumer products were sold to the Soviets in exchange for military alliance, right? In many ways. That's the second part. The third part has to do with military. GCC countries are as worried about their security. They really have a strong problem right now. It seems like as America begins to give out, move away from Gulf countries or Middle East in general, there's a void created, and the void is filled right now by Russia. Chinese will not come at all, that I know for a fact. They will not get into that mess. So there has to be a need for some sort of a military alignment, like NATO was created after World War II in terms of Soviets. There has to be a military alignment of some sort between the Gulf countries. It is happening with Israel, but I think we have transited the relationship between local conflicts versus a global alignment in some fashion. So I think there'll be significant alignment between security-wise, at least, and it could be just a cyber security, but I'm talking about physical infrastructure or military hardware in any fashion that can be arranged. So those are the three things that I see. Consumer markets going export very aggressively into the Gulf countries, because Gulf countries will not buy from sort of Western countries. They still have the demand anyhow. So they may shift toward India and military and the sovereign funds.
Dr. Sheth, there's another question posed to you, possibly you know him also, by Mr. Vijay Krishna. And his query is that there's a lot of talk in India that because of the COVID and China sort of suspected role, India should strategically step in and become a manufacturing destination. Mr. Krishna wants your views, and he also quoted Mr. Abhijit Banerjee, the Indian Nobel Prize. So he wants your views. Thank you, sir.
There is no question that we have the science capability and the size, number of scientists. Also, we have the manufacturing capability. If you broaden out from pharmaceutical to healthcare, we can make PPP equipment, personal protective equipment, pretty much. Not just the ventilators, but also the plastic masks. General Motors does it. We have an automotive sector that can do it. I think it's a question of making that as a very strategic industry. Government declares that this is a very key industry, not only for the domestic consumption, but world consumption, and come out, as I said, you will not sell the products worldwide unless you rise to the global standards, quality standards. You saw what happened. Chinese shipped out products to India, which were returned back because they were defective. We are finding the same thing. Chinese do not meet the standards of N95, which is 3M standard in many ways. That's a de facto standard. Now 3M is in India.
Yes.
They're already here. How can we make sure that Indian companies, other than 3M only, make top standard products, which can only happen with a high-tech approach or orientation? I don't think our labor-intensive industries will survive, personally. We have to elevate the labor itself to a more skilled labor. I mean, today, automobile is a computer. Tomorrow will be autonomous cars. I mean, traditional technician who changed the oil, remember, when it was basically all electromechanical, today has to learn how to use a computer to do the diagnostics of the car. We elevated that auto mechanic to a level that he would have never understood before. This is the advantage. And fortunately, with the digital technology so affordable now, the smartphones, for example, the network like a 4G, Reliance, Geo and others, whatever they are, I think it's very easy to leapfrog our hard-working labor class to much more skilled labor. So they have the smartness of the machines and the hard work at the same time that comes about. To me, that's necessary, but it has to happen with a target of the whole industry, not just pharmaceuticals. So we are a healthcare manufacturing. Okay.
Thank you, doctor.
Sure.
Sir, can we take one more question?
One last question.
One last question.
Oh, sure. For me, I'm fine.
Yes, sir. The question is from Mohit Gandhi. He says, what impact will India's self-reliance, Atmanirbhar policy, stating vocal for local, will have on MNCs and globalization?
Very, very good question and very controversial. Self-reliance doesn't mean ownership by Indians. I think that's the disconnect. That is a old colonial thinking. When the colonial powers abused our resources, etc., the new thinking is that self-reliance means how can I Indianize a multinational corporation? Period. Which is done. I mean, I don't think of Unilever, Hindustan Unilever, as a foreign company. ITC was a cigarette company. It is totally Indianized. I think we have to give up that hang-up in our mind that it has to be an Indian company making in India, and that is the only self-reliance model. And let's just continue. Today, some of the largest corporations and brand names in UK are owned by foreigners. We have not seen street revolt by the British people to say, how come Mittal Steel has taken over the steel industry along with Tata's? How come Tata's own, Jaguar and Land Rover? Aditya Birla Group has similarly taken largest chunk around here called Novelis, which is a flat aluminum sheet. There is no revolt on the street here because ownership does not matter. At one time, ownership mattered because in colonial model, you owned and you exploited and took all the money out, which is the biggest worry we have. Our largest technology companies are all parking their money abroad. They have no loyalty to America, my view. I think the reverse can happen where, I must tell you, we have to really study our history. Something unique is about India, probably America to some extent. Anybody who has come, whether as invaders or as people to study, or as scholars or companies, we have made them Indianized. I don't know why. They convert themselves to becoming Indian. To me, that's an enormous soft power of the nation. So self-reliance doesn't mean ownership by Indian companies only. Well, I'm a very strong advocate on that. I mean, Indian companies have to compete with foreign companies in India, whether they like it or not. Otherwise, it's the easy way out. Any more questions? Okay.
Yeah.
I think we run out of time, sir.
Sure.
We request Dr. Anil Rao to step in.
Yes, Anil. I'm not able to hear your audio.
Anil, audio.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Vijayan, Dr. D.N. Murthy, and participants for those amazing questions. I can see many more questions, some on healthcare becoming the new IT for India and many others. However, thank you, Dr. Jagdish Seth, from my bottom of my heart for such a wonderful session. Sir, your passion at this age of 83 is an inspiration to every academician, industry folks, and your deeper insights on repositioning India in this integrated global economy were enthralling. Today, your positive thoughts and conviction and a 10-point recommendations made us all charged to see India becomes strategically global. Dr. Seth, your 10-point recommendation serves a capsule, a recipe for India to take advantage of the world new order. Dr. Seth, thank you so very much. I would like to thank everyone for your participation, and thanks to Professor Vikram and V-School's Executive Education team for putting together today's webinar, along with Mr. Jayant of Academy of Indian Marketing. Thank you once again, from Mr. Jayant, Vikram, and all the team members at the back end who put this webinar together. Dr. Seth, thank you very much, and we are really pleased to have you on webinar today. A fantastic 10-point recommendation which you mentioned, and I'm sure each one of us will be gearing up to get to this agenda. The Government of India in particular, I'm sure this recommendation also reached them, and your conviction has always been great on our minds. Request all participants to give us your valuable feedback for us at V-School to improve further in our journey to education and continuous learning. And thank you very much, everyone, for having spent your valuable time for this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Seth, once again. Pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, Anil. Now, namaste.
You,
we have taken yoga all over the world. We should take namaste as a new way of handshaking, okay? It is the genuine, it's very correct. So, namaste. Thank you. Thank
Namaste,
you.
sir.
Bye.
Namaste.
Namaste. Bye.
Namaste.
Have a great day, sir. Bye.
Thank you.